It was supposed to be a quiet family dinner, just like any other, but it turned into the most terrifying night of my life. My mother-in-law, someone I'd always tried to get along with despite our differences, handed me a drink that looked harmless enough. "It's special," she said with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, but I didn't realize until it was too late that the drink she gave me wasn't just special, it was poisoned. When the dizziness started creeping in, I could feel my heart race. I didn't want to believe it. I thought maybe it was just my imagination, or the stress of a long day catching up with me. But then, as I sat there, trying to keep my composure, the pieces fell into place. The way Linda had watched me, the way she had almost insisted I take the drink, this wasn't an accident, this was no mistake. She had done this on purpose. I knew right away that I couldn't confront her directly, not yet, but I had one chance to make sure I didn't fall victim to her cruelty. The only thing I could do was to act quickly and think carefully. So, without her noticing, I swapped the glasses. The moment I did it, everything changed, and in the blink of an eye, I was no longer just trying to survive the night. I was fighting for my life. This is the story of how a family dinner became a battle of wits, and how I turned the tables in the most unexpected way. I had always thought of myself as someone who tried to keep the peace. When I married Ethan, I knew that his family came with a set of challenges, his mother, Linda, being the most prominent one. Linda had always been a force to be reckoned with, the type of person who believed she knew best about everything. But for the sake of my marriage, I tried my best to be cordial. I made an effort at family gatherings, attended dinner parties, and showed up to every holiday celebration with a smile, even though I could feel the tension simmering beneath the surface. Our relationship had never been perfect, but I had always tried to make it work. Ethan's family had a certain way of doing things, and Linda, as the matriarch, called all the shots. She had been a significant presence in his life since childhood, and I always felt like I was somehow the outsider, trying to fit into a world that didn't quite welcome me. Ethan was caught in the middle, always trying to make everyone happy, but as much as he tried to balance it all, there was always a subtle divide between me and his mother. It wasn't that she hated me, it was more like she thought she had control over everything, and my place in that control was minimal. Dinner parties at Linda's house were an event in themselves. The table was always meticulously set, the food perfect, and the conversation, well, it could be a little stilted. Linda would always comment on my cooking or my children, offering unsolicited advice on everything from raising them to the way I managed my home. I took it in stride because, in the end, I knew it wasn't worth engaging in every little battle. I had bigger things to focus on, my own family, my career, and keeping my peace. But I had started to notice something. Over time, the comments became more pointed, more personal, and I began to feel like Linda wasn't just criticizing me for the sake of giving advice. She was criticizing me because she wanted to undermine me, to prove that she knew best and that I was somehow lacking in her eyes. At first, I brushed it off. I told myself she was just being herself and that I should be the bigger person. But as the months passed, I began to realize that Linda's criticisms weren't just about minor things. They were about me, about my role in the family. It felt like she was always trying to remind me of my place. I tried not to let it bother me too much, but the truth is, it did. The constant undermining, the little barbs, the way she acted as though I wasn't good enough for her son or for the family business, it wore me down. Ethan, ever the peacekeeper, would always brush it off when I brought it up. "She doesn't mean it that way," he'd say. "She's just used to being in charge." And for a long time, I accepted that explanation, keeping my frustration buried beneath the surface. But that evening, everything changed. I had been dreading the family dinner that night. It wasn't the first time we'd all gathered at Linda's place, but there was something in the air that felt different. Ethan had noticed it too. He seemed distracted, worried even, and I could tell that there had been some tension between his mother and him recently. Linda had become more possessive of Ethan's time, and I could see the strain it was putting on him. But despite all of that, we went, as we always did. I told myself it was just another dinner, another night of pretending everything was fine. I wasn't prepared for what was to come. When we arrived at Linda's house, everything seemed normal. The table was set, the food was laid out, and the usual pleasantries were exchanged. Ethan and his father, James, quickly got into a conversation about some project at work, leaving me with Linda. She was unusually quiet, which made me even more uneasy. I tried to make small talk, but Linda wasn't very responsive. Her eyes kept drifting toward me, almost like she was watching my every move. It felt like something was brewing beneath the surface, but I couldn't quite put my finger on it. The meal was pleasant enough, though I could feel the pressure building with every passing minute. It was as if Linda's presence was growing more intense, more calculating. She kept offering me more wine, more food, each time with a little more insistence than usual. At first, I thought nothing of it. After all, she was always a gracious host. But there was something about the way she poured my drink that made me pause. Her eyes never left mine as she carefully added another splash of something dark into the glass. I didn't think much of it at the time, assuming it was just part of her usual theatrics. By the time the dessert was served, I started feeling strange. My vision was a little blurry, and I couldn't focus properly. At first, I thought it was just the wine, but the dizziness started to intensify. My hands began to feel clammy, and a faint headache started to pulse at the back of my head. I tried to shake it off, but the discomfort was growing. Linda, who had been sitting across from me, was watching me intently, her smile now more like a smirk. My heart started to race. Something wasn't right. That's when I realized Linda hadn't just given me a regular drink. She had done something to it. The feeling of being drugged, of being betrayed by someone so close to me, began to sink in, and a wave of fear washed over me. I knew in that moment I couldn't stay silent. I couldn't let her get away with whatever she was trying to do. I had to do something. I wasn't sure exactly what she was trying to achieve, but I knew I wasn't going to be her victim. Not tonight. As I sat there, trying to steady myself, I kept looking at Linda, her eyes now narrowing, her smile still in place, as if she was watching for my reaction. I felt trapped, but I had to stay calm. If I could just hold it together, if I could make it through this night, I'd find a way to protect myself and my family. And that's when I knew this family dinner was about to turn into something I never expected. As I sat there, the dizziness slowly but steadily crept over me. It wasn't just the lightheadedness from drinking a little too much wine. It was something more insidious. I could feel my head starting to spin, and a strange tingling sensation spread through my limbs. At first, I tried to push it away, telling myself it was just a bad reaction to the alcohol. But the more I focused on it, the more certain I became that something wasn't right. I was becoming uncomfortably aware of how sharp Linda's gaze was on me, how her eyes never left my face. She was studying me, waiting for something. My gut twisted as the realization hit me like a ton of bricks. She had drugged me. What shocked me even more was how deliberate it felt. Linda wasn't the type to make mistakes, especially not when it came to family matters. She was too calculating, too aware of her influence on everyone around her. This wasn't some innocent mix-up. This wasn't an accident. She had poured something into my drink on purpose, and whatever it was starting to take effect. I tried to shake the thought from my mind, but the symptoms were undeniable. My vision was blurry, and my heart was pounding louder than usual. My fingers were growing numb, and I could feel a wave of panic rising in me, but I couldn't show it. Not now. Not in front of Ethan. Not in front of her. I couldn't let Linda see the fear in my eyes. She would win, and I would lose everything if she saw any sign that I was on to her. I had been trying to keep the peace for years, trying to make things work with her, despite the undercurrent of tension that had always existed between us. But this was different. This wasn't about her trying to control the family or make sly comments about my parenting. This was something far more dangerous, something that could have serious consequences if I didn't act quickly. I looked over at Ethan, who was deep in conversation with his father, completely unaware of what was happening to me. They were talking about some project at work, and Ethan was gesturing animatedly, completely oblivious to the storm brewing across the table. I felt a pang of resentment toward him for not noticing the subtle shift in the atmosphere. I had been dealing with Linda's passive-aggressive behavior for years, and now it felt like my worst fears had come true. She had crossed a line that I couldn't ignore, and Ethan wasn't there to protect me from it. I could feel the tension building inside me as the reality of the situation began to sink in. I wasn't just dealing with a toxic mother-in-law anymore. I was dealing with someone who had intentionally tried to harm me. The anger started to rise within me, but I knew I couldn't act on it yet. I needed to stay calm. I needed to buy myself time. My mind raced, trying to come up with a plan. I couldn't confront Linda directly in front of the whole family. That would only make things worse. She would deny everything and twist the narrative to make it look like I was the one overreacting. I couldn't give her that power. But I also couldn't ignore what was happening to my body. The effects of whatever she had put in my drink were starting to escalate. My pulse was rapid, and my stomach churned as if it were being turned inside out. My breathing became shallow, and I struggled to focus. I knew that if I didn't act soon, I might pass out, and that was a risk I couldn't take. The thought of not being able to protect myself, of not being able to stop Linda from getting away with this, sent a wave of panic through me. But I fought it back, focusing instead on the details, what I could do, how I could get through this night without letting her see that I knew. I glanced around the table, trying to keep my composure. The rest of the family was still eating, chatting about trivial things, laughing and enjoying the evening. The contrast between their carefree conversation and my rising anxiety was almost unbearable. It felt like a cruel joke, like I was living in two completely different worlds at once. I needed to focus, to find a way to get myself out of this situation. That's when I noticed something crucial. Linda wasn't drinking her own concoction. She hadn't taken a single sip from the glass that she had so eagerly handed me. The realization hit me hard. Linda knew exactly what she was doing. She wasn't just trying to poison me in some random act of malice. This was calculated. She had watched me drink it, her eyes never leaving me to see if I would react. And when I did, when I started to feel the effects of whatever she had slipped into the drink, she knew I would be too weak to fight back, too disoriented to confront her head on. I tried to steady myself, fighting against the effects that were rapidly overtaking my body. My breathing was becoming more labored, and I could feel my hands trembling. I didn't have much time. But even in the chaos of my thoughts, one thing was clear. I couldn't let Linda win. I couldn't let her control the situation. If she thought she could get away with this, she was wrong. I had to take action. I had to protect myself, even if it meant playing a dangerous game. And in that moment, I knew exactly what I needed to do. My heart was racing, my thoughts scattered, but I had to act quickly. I had to stay calm. I couldn't let Linda see that I knew. With a quiet determination, I began to think through my options. If I could just hold on for a little longer, if I could manage to escape this dinner without letting her know I was on to her, I might have a chance to turn this around. I wasn't sure how, but I knew one thing. I wasn't going to be her victim. Not tonight. The suffocating panic that had started to creep in began to overwhelm me as the effects of whatever Linda had put in my drink continued to take hold. My heart was pounding in my chest, and every breath felt like it was harder to take. But despite the intense fear I was feeling, one thing was crystal clear in my mind. I needed to stay composed. I couldn't let Linda or anyone see that I was anything less than in control. If I showed weakness, if I showed that I was on the brink of breaking, I knew that would be the moment Linda would seize the opportunity to strike harder. I scanned the room quickly, looking for any possible escape, any way I could get out of this situation without drawing attention to myself. Ethan was still engrossed in conversation with his father. He hadn't even looked up from his plate. That was the hardest part for me, feeling so alone in that moment. I could hear the clinking of silverware and the chatter around the table, but it all felt distant, like I was in a different world altogether. Linda's presence was looming over me, and her gaze never wavered. It was like she was waiting for something. I tried to shift my attention back to the situation at hand. I couldn't just sit there and let the poison take hold of me. I had to act. I had to get out of this. But how? I needed a plan. Something simple yet effective. Something that would allow me to get out of this dangerous situation without alerting Linda to the fact that I had figured out what she had done. In that moment, I knew I had to think quickly, but I also needed to be smart about it. If I did anything rash, if I made the wrong move, it could make everything worse. As the dizziness intensified, I felt the edges of my vision blur, but there was something in me, something deep inside, that refused to succumb. I thought back to every moment that had led up to this, every moment of tension between Linda and me, every little comment she made to undermine me, to control the narrative, to make me feel small. This was the breaking point. She had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let her get away with it. But how could I do this without being obvious? How could I protect myself when she was sitting right across from me, watching my every move? Then it hit me. The glasses, the drinks, the glass of wine that I had just been given, the one that was starting to make my body feel heavy and disoriented, could be switched. In the briefest of moments, I remembered that Ethan hadn't touched his drink. He was still talking to his dad, laughing, totally unaware of the tension I was feeling. I could swap our glasses, slip the poisoned one out of my reach, and no one would even notice. The idea was simple, but it was my only option. I had to make sure no one saw what I was doing. If Linda realized that I was onto her, she might react in a way that would escalate things far beyond what I could control. I had to stay calm, be subtle, and act fast. I took a slow, deep breath, trying to steady my trembling hands. I looked down at my glass, still half full of the strange drink, and carefully picked it up. My heart was racing, but I didn't let it show. I could feel the panic rising inside me, threatening to take over, but I pushed it down. Now was the time for action. With as much casualness as I could muster, I leaned over and gently placed my glass down on the edge of the table, pretending like nothing was out of the ordinary. As I did this, I shifted my gaze toward Ethan's untouched glass. It was positioned directly next to his plate, a few inches away from my own. I waited for the perfect moment. It couldn't be too quick, or it would look suspicious, but it couldn't take too long, or I would risk Linda noticing. The moment came when Ethan reached across the table for another roll, his hand briefly moving away from his glass. It was my window. I quickly swapped the glasses, making sure I didn't spill a single drop. My heart was pounding in my ears, and every muscle in my body was tense with fear and anticipation. I couldn't believe what I was doing. One wrong move, and it would all be over. But there was no turning back now. I placed Ethan's glass, uncontaminated and still full, where my poisoned glass had been, and slid my own glass to the side, out of Linda's view. I held my breath, praying that she wouldn't notice. I tried to act as normal as possible, lifting my glass to my lips, pretending to sip from it, though I was almost certain Linda would be watching me like a hawk. She didn't say anything, but I could see her watching my every move out of the corner of her eye. At that moment, the dizziness in my head seemed to lessen slightly, as if the threat was now in the past. The poison was still in my system, but I knew I was safe, for now. I had outsmarted her. I had taken control of the situation, but as I looked at Linda, still sitting across the table, her smile never wavered. It was as if she didn't even realize that I knew. She thought she was in control, that I was her pawn in a game she had been playing for years. But I had just flipped the board. I wasn't going to let her win, not tonight. I couldn't let my guard down, not yet. I knew Linda's manipulation ran deep, and this wouldn't be the last time she tried to undermine me. But in that moment, I had won. I had turned the tables, and for the first time, I was the one in control of my fate. But the night was far from over, and I knew I had to remain vigilant. As I sat there, pretending everything was normal, I kept my eyes on Linda. She didn't know it yet, but her carefully laid plans had been foiled. I had swapped the glasses, and now I would take this as far as I could, without her ever knowing what had happened. The tension between me and Linda was palpable, but at that moment, I couldn't afford to let her know that I had figured out what she had done. I had to hold it together, show no sign of fear or suspicion. I knew Linda well enough to understand that if she suspected I was onto her, she wouldn't hesitate to make the situation worse. So I did my best to keep calm, even as the effects of the poison lingered in my body, making my head spin and my heart race. As I sipped from the glass I had swapped with Ethan's, I could feel the weight lifting off my shoulders just a little. I had successfully removed the immediate danger of drinking from the poisoned glass, but I still needed to know how this was going to play out. I had been expecting Linda to make some sort of comment, to try to play it off or to test me in some way, but instead, she just sat there, watching me quietly. Her eyes were narrowed, almost calculating, as though she was waiting for something, waiting for me to collapse, for me to show weakness. Time seemed to stretch on forever as I sat at the dinner table, pretending to engage in the conversation around me, my mind constantly running through the possible scenarios in my head. The meal continued on as usual, but I could tell that Linda's eyes never left me. She would glance at me every so often as if she was waiting for some sort of reaction to what she had done. I couldn't help but wonder what her endgame was. Did she truly think that I wouldn't notice? Or was she hoping that I would be too weak to fight back? I glanced over at Ethan, who was still deep in conversation with his father, oblivious to the drama unfolding in front of him. I had to remind myself that Ethan didn't know. He couldn't have known, not yet. This was something that had been building over time, a quiet betrayal that only Linda and I were fully aware of. And in that moment, as the minutes ticked by, I realized just how much power she had tried to take away from me. The power to choose, the power to live, and the power to protect myself from harm. But I had taken that power back without her even knowing it. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what to do next. Should I confront her right then and there? Should I expose her in front of everyone? I knew that if I did that, it would turn into a full-blown confrontation. Linda would deny everything, twist the situation, and probably try to manipulate everyone around her into thinking I was the crazy one. It wasn't the time for that. I needed to bide my time and let things play out more strategically. I decided to wait, to play the long game. I finished my glass of wine and then casually excused myself from the table. I needed a moment to collect my thoughts, to regain my strength before I made any decisions. I stood up, trying to move as naturally as possible, and walked into the kitchen. As soon as I was out of view, I leaned against the counter, breathing deeply to steady myself. The poison was still in my system, but it was starting to wear off. I could feel the fog in my head slowly clearing, and I knew that I had to act fast. That's when I heard it. The sound of footsteps behind me. It was Linda. She had followed me into the kitchen, and as I turned around, I could see the look in her eyes. The same calculating, cold look she had given me all evening. But now, there was something else behind it. Something darker. "I know what you did," she said, her voice low, her words dripping with venom. She didn't have to explain what she meant. It was clear from the way she spoke that she knew I had swapped the glasses. It was like she had been waiting for this moment, as if she knew I would eventually figure it out. I didn't flinch. I didn't react the way she thought I would. Instead, I stared back at her, steady and unwavering. "You really thought I wouldn't notice?" I replied calmly. "You thought I wouldn't see through your little game?" Linda's face twisted into a grimace, her eyes narrowing further. She took a step forward, but I didn't back down. I had nothing left to lose. I had already made my decision. I wasn't going to be her victim anymore. "You should have known better than to try something like that," I continued, my voice surprisingly steady. "I may have tolerated you for years, but I'm not going to let you get away with this. You can't control me anymore." Linda's expression faltered, but only for a moment. Then she crossed her arms and sneered. "You think you've won?" she scoffed. "You're nothing without me. You never were. This is my family, my business, and you'll never be part of it." Her words stung, but they didn't have the same impact on me that they used to. She didn't have the power she thought she did. I wasn't the same person I had been when I first married Ethan. I had learned too much, seen too much. Linda's manipulation had been a constant thorn in my side, but it wasn't going to hurt me anymore. "I'm done with you," I said, taking a step back. "And if you think I'm going to let you poison me and get away with it, you're sorely mistaken. I'm not the weak woman you think I am. You've underestimated me for too long, but not anymore." The words hung in the air, heavy with finality. Linda stared at me for a long moment, her face hardening, but she said nothing. Finally, she turned on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen, leaving me standing there, breathing heavily, but feeling victorious. I had confronted her, I had exposed her manipulation, and in doing so, I had regained control over my life. I had outsmarted her in a way that she hadn't seen coming. I knew that things between us would never be the same, and maybe that was for the best. It was a bitter victory, but it was mine. As I walked back into the dining room, I saw Ethan still chatting with his father, completely unaware of the dangerous game his mother had been playing. I couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and anger. This wasn't the end, this was just the beginning of a new chapter. I knew that I had to keep my guard up. But in that moment, as I sat back down at the table, I knew one thing for sure. I would never let Linda, or anyone, take control of my life again. The days following that fateful dinner were filled with a mixture of emotions. Relief and satisfaction were tempered by a lingering sense of unease. The confrontation with Linda had been unavoidable, and I had done what needed to be done to protect myself. But I knew that this wasn't just about one dinner or one confrontation. It was about something much larger, something deeper than the poison she had slipped into my drink that night. It was about the power dynamics in my life, the boundaries I had allowed others to cross, and the choices I had made, choices that I was now realizing had been guided more by fear than by strength. The immediate aftermath of the dinner felt like a brief moment of calm before the storm. Linda didn't contact me for a few days. She didn't try to apologize or explain herself. No, Linda wasn't the type to admit her wrongs. Instead, she retreated into the background, likely trying to gather herself, to come up with some sort of plan to regain control of the situation. But I was prepared for whatever was coming. I knew Linda well enough to understand that she wouldn't let this go. She was too proud, too used to being in charge, to allow someone like me to challenge her and get away with it. For the first time in a long time, I felt a sense of empowerment. I had faced my fear head on and had come out on top. But it wasn't just about winning that one battle. It was about the realization that I had finally found my voice. The calmness I had shown in the face of danger, the decision to act when I could have simply succumbed to Linda's manipulations, was something I hadn't thought I was capable of. And now that I had taken control of that moment, it gave me the strength to reevaluate my life and my relationship with the people around me. After that dinner, I took some time to think, not just about Linda, but about everything. About Ethan, about our family, about what I wanted from my life going forward. Over the years, I had allowed so many people to make decisions for me. I had allowed Linda's criticisms and manipulations to shape the way I saw myself. I had let her control my relationship with Ethan, making me feel as though I was always in competition with her, always second to her in every way. But that night had opened my eyes to the truth. I was worth so much more than I had given myself credit for. I had spent too long putting my needs on the back burner in favor of keeping the peace, in favor of maintaining family harmony. But peace at the cost of my own happiness and dignity was no peace at all. The next few days were filled with reflection. I spent time with Ethan, trying to connect with him in a way that I hadn't in years. As much as I loved him, our marriage had taken a toll over the years, due to the constant tension with his family, especially with Linda. There had been so many moments where I had felt isolated, where I had been forced to choose between my own sense of self-worth and my desire to be accepted by his family. But after everything that had happened, I realized that I had been fighting the wrong battle. The true conflict wasn't between me and Linda. It was between me and the version of myself that had allowed Linda to control my narrative. I wasn't going to let that version of myself continue to exist. It was time for a change. I had to have a conversation with Ethan. It was long overdue. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was fine when I was so deeply unhappy with the way things had been. Over coffee one morning, I sat him down and spoke openly about my feelings. I told him everything, from how I had been feeling about his mother's behavior to how I had been internalizing the hurt for so long, thinking I had to be the one to adjust, to accommodate, to make things work. I told him about the poison, about how I had felt betrayed, but also how it had changed something in me, how it had made me realize that I had been compromising my own happiness for the sake of family harmony, something that wasn't worth sacrificing anymore. Ethan was quiet for a long time. I could see the surprise on his face, mixed with concern and guilt. I knew he hadn't fully realized the extent of how Linda's actions had been affecting me. He had been so caught up in his own relationship with his mother that he hadn't seen the emotional toll it had been taking on me. But after I shared my feelings, he seemed to understand, and I could tell he was genuinely sorry. It wasn't easy for him either. Linda had always been a dominant force in their family, and I knew it wasn't simple to confront her. But we both realized that something needed to change, not just for me, but for our family as a whole. The conversation with Ethan marked the beginning of a new chapter for us. I knew things wouldn't change overnight. Linda wouldn't suddenly become a warm, understanding mother-in-law, and I wasn't expecting her to. But what mattered now was that Ethan and I were on the same page. We needed to set boundaries, to be firm with Linda about what was and wasn't acceptable in our lives. I wasn't going to allow her to manipulate me or control me any longer, and Ethan agreed to support me in that. The aftermath of that night with Linda wasn't just about her actions, it was about my own growth. I had learned to stand up for myself in a way I had never done before. I had learned that I didn't have to tolerate toxic behavior for the sake of peace, and that it was okay to prioritize my own well-being. It was a painful lesson, but it was one that I was grateful for. And as time went on, things did get better. It wasn't perfect, but the dynamic between Linda and me shifted. She still tried to push her boundaries, but I was no longer afraid of confronting her, of speaking up for myself. I had learned that I didn't need her approval to feel good about who I was. I had finally taken control of my own narrative, and it was empowering in ways I hadn't imagined. In the end, the greatest lesson I learned was that sometimes the most painful moments lead to the greatest personal growth. The betrayal, the poison, and the confrontation had all been catalysts for a change I didn't know I needed. And now, I was free. Free to be myself. Free to live my life the way I wanted, and most importantly, free to take back the power that had always been mine.